already talking about. And and the only reason I'm continuing to do this is because somehow the State Department, the French, the United Nations, and all of them seem to be laboring under this misconception that I'll go away and I won't talk about it anymore. I'm not going to go away. I'm going to keep talking about it. And the problem that we have right now is started some time ago, and I will just share with you some of the new development today. And we're talking about the rigged election that took place in Cote d'Ivoire, and the fact that someone whose name is Alassane Ouattara, we have demonstrated very clearly, won the election by fraudulent means. The president of that country is Laurent Gbagbo. He's been president now for a number of years. His wife, Simone Gbagbo, has been a gracious and a great first lady. Now, what I want to do today, this is the 7th time I've been on the floor talking about this, is give you the latest of this grave situation in Cote d'Ivoire. And I can only say that it continues to be a targeted genocide against supporters and perceived supporters of the deposed president, Laurent Gbagbo. Now, this will be, as I said, my 7th time speaking on this on the floor, and the last time we talked about on April 4th, when we first started talking about this, we were hoping that we'd be able to stop the State Department and others from going along with what's going on now in Cote d'Ivoire. I know it's complicated. A lot of people don't remember the genocide in Rwanda of 1994, and now we look back and say, oh, what a horrible thing that was. Sure, it was horrible. But right now, what's going on in the streets of Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire is something that has got to be surfaced in front of the American people. I have new information that proves that what I've been saying for the last 7 weeks, that the rebel leader, Alassane Ouattara, is still carrying on death squads, killing people in the streets of Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. There they are, Madam President. That's the death squad. These are the people that are murdering today as we speak and torturing people in Abidjan. I bet there are a handful of people who even know where Abidjan is. But this is the city, the capital of Cote d'Ivoire, a beautiful country. And these people coming in from the north under this Alassane Ouattara are in there today. I don't know how many hundreds of people they're murdering just today, but they're doing it, and they're torturing, and they're raping. And there's, but before I tell you what the most recent information that came out from the Human Rights Watch, I'm going to remind you of what I said back on the 27th of May, and that was when Amnesty International, they reported that a manhunt, and I'm quoting now from Amnesty International, what I said right here from this podium, that a manhunt was launched against Gbagbo's loyalists in Abidjan, and several senior officials close to him were beaten in the hours after his arrest. That was 2 weeks ago. And I'm further quoting now from the Amnesty International. In the west of the country, thousands of people fled their homes, and many are still living in the forest, too frightened to return. Now look at this. This is the burned, charred bodies of people who have been tortured to death. This just happened. It's going on today, right now. There's a man who's just severely beaten. He died right after that. A small child who was put to death the same way. Here they are in the middle of the executions. That's going on right now. And then Gaten Mutu, who's Amnesty International's West Africa researcher, said, quote, human rights violations are still being committed against real and perceived supporters of Laurent Gbagbo. Alassane Ouattara's failure to condemn these acts could be seen as a green light by many of his security forces and other armed elements fighting with them to continue. Ouattara must publicly state that all violence against civilian population must. All right, that's what our mandate was 2 weeks ago. That's what they're supposed to do 2 weeks ago. They went on to say in the Amnesty International, attacks against villages inhabited by people belonging to ethnic groups considered supporters of Gbagbo, the legitimate president, continued in the first weeks of May, according to Amnesty International. Between 6 and 8 May, several villages were burned and dozens killed. Ouattara's Republican forces justified these acts by saying they were looking for arms and Liberian mercenaries. And they went on to describe this. There's an article in Guardian magazine that talked about this. This, again, was a little over 2 weeks ago. They said, quote, an Amnesty delegation spent 2 months in Ivory Coast, that's Cote d'Ivoire, gathering more than 100 witnesses' statements from people who survived the massacre in Duquoy. Now, that's what this actually is in that small town of Duquoy. The neighboring villages on March 29th. All statements, still quoting from them, all the statements indicated a systematic and targeted series of killings committed by the uniformed Republican forces loyal to Ouattara, who executed hundreds of men and on political and ethnic grounds. And before killing them, he would ask their victims to give their names, show identity cards, and some of these cards were found beside the bodies. A woman who lived in Duquoy told researchers, quote, they came into the yards and chased the women. Then they told the men to line up and asked them to state their first and second names and show their identity cards. They then executed them. I was present, quoting a woman who was watching her husband, while they sorted the men out. 3 young men, one of who was about 15, were shot to death in front of me. And this Amnesty's report also accuses the UN mission, which has a base less than a mile from Duquoy, of what they called fatal inertia. Fatal inertia, that means they did nothing. They let this go on. We're talking about the United Nations. You know, people around here, there are a lot of liberals in this body who don't think that anything worthwhile is worthwhile unless it comes from some big body like the United Nations, and that's what's happening right now. So I want to go ahead. I know that there's someone else on the floor that wants to speak, but I just want to be sure that we are informed that what was going on then, what I talked about 2 weeks ago, is still happening today. Now, what happened today is the newly released report by Human Rights Watch. This is a different group now from Amnesty International, which states, and I'm going to quote now, this came out today, armed forces loyal to President Alassane Ouattara have killed at least 149 real or perceived supporters of the former president, Laurent Gbagbo, since taking control of the commercial capital of Abidjan in mid-April of 2011. The report goes on to describe the gruesome detail, barbaric episodes of the torture and the deaths at the hands of the Ouattara forces. And this is happening today, right now. And here are a few examples today. Ouattara's forces, I'm reading now, this is from the Human Rights Watch. Ouattara's forces sealed off and searched areas formerly controlled by pro-Gbagbo militia, and the majority of the documented abuses occurred in the long-time pro-Gbagbo stronghold of Yopongnon. That's the town in that stronghold, in the south part of the, you got to keep in mind that Ouattara's forces came from the Muslim area up north. Most killings were point-blank executions of youth. You're seeing a point-blank, that's what it looks like, Madam President, right there, the gun to the head. Most killings were point-blank executions of youth from ethnic groups generally aligned with Gbagbo in what appeared to be collective punishment for these groups' participation in Gbagbo's militia. One man described how Republican soldiers killed his 21-year-old brother. 2 of them grabbed his legs, another one held his arms behind him, a 5th one held his head. Then a guy pulled out a knife and slit my brother's throat. He was screaming. I saw his legs shaking after they slit his throat, the blood streaming down as they were doing it. They said they had to eliminate all of the young patrons that they had caused. Now leave this, yeah. All right. During the raid in Abidjan, the forces, the UN forces, the French, and Ouattara, they went in, and it happens that the seated president, President Gbagbo, he had not a lot of armaments, but he had a whole lot of young people, and they were armed not with weapons, but with baseball bats, with wooden clubs, and they surrounded the palace to try to protect him, knowing that they would kill their president. And this is where they are today. These are the young kids. This is in a gas station up here. They're all lined up there. They're executing some of them, starving, beating the rest of them. But look at there's the pictures, what is going on. These young patriots were young supporters of President Gbagbo who surrounded his palace in a human chain, armed with just sticks and bats. against the UN and French attack helicopters, which were bombing Gbagbo's residence, now being searched out by Ouattara's forces for torture and death. The report goes on, this report came out today, quote, another woman who witnessed the killing of 18 youths was brutally raped by the Republican force soldiers after being forced to load their vehicles with pillaged goods. On May 23rd, an elderly man in the same neighborhood as saw Republican forces execute his son, whom they accused of being a member of the pro-Gbagbo militia. Another witness described seeing the Republican forces slit the throats of the youth in front of his father after finding an AK-47 and a grenade in his bedroom during a 4 a.m. house-to-house search. The witness was stripped and forced to hand over his laptop, computer, cell phones, money, and was murdered. Human Rights Watch documented similar pillages of sources in scores of houses in Abidjan. The witness, by the way, Madam President, I personally talked to these people in Abidjan who witnessed this going on. The witness, like many others interviewed by Human Rights Watch, waited to flee Abidjan to his family village, but had no money for transportation since the Republican forces had taken everything. Human Rights Watch said it documented 54 extrajudicial executions at detention sites, including police stations and the oil. And that was the station that we just now saw right here. There's where the execution of the young kids are taking place. In addition to the killings that I'm reading now from the Human Rights Watch, the Human Rights interviewed a young man who had been detained by the Republican forces and arrested for no other apparent reason than their age and ethnic groups. Nearly every former detainee described being struck repeatedly with guns, belts, ropes, and fists for allegedly participation in the young patriots. Those are the young people surrounding the palace. Several described torture, including forcible removal of teeth from one victim and placed a burning hot knife in another victim's and then cutting him. Mr. President, the Human Rights report that witnesses consistently identified the killers and abusers as the Republican forces of Ouattara, and they were overseen by the Ouattara and the Soros. Now, Soros is the general of Ouattara. He's the one who was responsible in going into Dikwe. There's Dikwe. That's where they murdered all the people, and this Soros they speak of is the one who is responsible for that under the supervision and direction of Alassane Ouattara. So the Human Rights Report calls on Ouattara to immediately ensure the humane treatment of anyone obtained by the forces. This is something I've been demanding for 7 weeks. I hope now that this report is going to draw the attention so that at least the State Department knows what's going on, because our State Department is going along with all this. They've had an opportunity to voice themselves and to come up with a solution. The solution is to offer amnesty or to send him to a country where he would be able to live. Now, I've been very critical of the State Department, the handling of this situation in Cote d'Ivoire from the beginning. I sent them evidence months ago that show that Ouattara had engaged in massive election fraud during the last year's presidential election. I called for an investigation, called for a new election. Of course, that all met on deaf ears. I also called upon the State Department to inquire as to the health and safety of President Laurent Gbagbo and his wife Simone. To date, we have nothing. So lastly, I had urged our State Department to use its power to influence and to allow the reconciliation process in Cote d'Ivoire to begin by allowing Gbagbo to go into exile. And I pointed out that at least half of the population of Cote d'Ivoire, they support Gbagbo. And I have knowledge of one African leader who is willing to accept Gbagbo's right now in his country. It's a sub-Saharan African country. The State Department has been aware of this for over a month. And again, I strongly suggest that that is the solution to the problem. It's been done before. It was done in Haiti with Baby Doc Duvalier and was sent into exile into France. So lastly, I just want to say, I know people are anxious to talk and they're tired of hearing me talk about Cote d'Ivoire, but I had a very pleasant experience yesterday. I met the nominee for the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. His name is Bill Burns, and I had a chance to visit with him about this and other problems that we're having now. I found him to be very receptive. I'm convinced that he embodies the high traditions of the Foreign Service, selfless, nonpartisan diplomatic service. And he indicated to me that he will follow through with my previous request with the State Department, and specifically regarding the health and well-being of the Bagbos. Lastly, I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with him. So I'm going to finish by letting you see the two Bagbos. This is the president. I believe that still should be the legitimate president of Cote d'Ivoire. The election was stolen from him. That was the happy guy that I knew, Laurent Gbagbo. This was him right after they took him. This side of his face is bashed in. His wife is a beautiful lady. Her name is Simone Gbagbo. Here is a picture of her. I've known her for over 15 years. A gracious lady. Everyone loves her. And after they took her, the Alassane Ouattara, this is what she looked like after that. You just imagine, use your imagination what happened. They ripped her hair out by the roots, went dancing up and down the streets of Abidjan with the hair, and put the other one up there too. And this is where you have to use your imagination. This is what's going on today because we can't get the State Department to cooperate. There they are, the death squad of the Alassane Ouattara. And there's the First Lady, the beautiful Simone Gbagbo. So lastly, I just hope somebody cares. I hope somebody in the State Department cares enough to intervene and allow that party to go into exile. There's already an operation for that. Almost every president of every African country who has called me is in agreement with what we're trying to do here. With that, I'll yield the floor.
The senator from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent to set aside